chat. Hi, welcome. Happy Friday. Welcome to the Privacy Chat Weekly. Although in August, we may not be so weekly. I'm heading on vacation next week, so you won't hear from me. And September, we've got the Global Privacy Assembly in Korea. Maybe I'll do one live from there. I know that getting over to Korea, not trivial for everybody and navigating, but I think the data protection regulators from around the world all convening and the programming and takeaways from that event might be helpful and invaluable. So maybe I will try to, although the time zone, let's see, head back, I don't know. We'll see. If it's a convenient time to do it live, I will. If not, the lives don't go away. You can always catch them a bit later. So just a brief one this Friday, since it is my last day in the office before going out on vacation. So we won't keep you too long, but I have been reading about the update to iOS 26. Now, here's what I do, and I feel like anybody who works in advertising, marketing, technology, deals with apps, needs to be super comfortable with the privacy and security flow in both iOS and Android. And many of us use just one device and one operating system, but obviously much of the world uses two different ones. And we end up being really comfortable with one. So what I've always done is, there was a time where I actually had both an iOS and an Android, but that was a hassle. So what I do now is I will use an iPad for my iOS experience and an Android, a Pixel, for my Android experience. You really can't compete with the iPad in terms of a tablet. So I got that, and then I'm pretty happy with my Pixel. But as a result, I use the beta versions of both, so I get the buggy software early, but can get a little bit of a look at what's going on and follow pretty well the updates from each. And obviously, it's interesting from a consumer perspective, but the developers who work for all sorts of organizations are often making privacy and security decisions and making legal commitments in how they create their privacy label. For instance, you, the legal person, might be writing your company's privacy policy, but meanwhile, your developer is filling in the information that creates the Apple nutritional label, which is a policy that says, here's what you do with data. And very often I peek at them, and guess what? What has been represented in that doesn't always match what the privacy policy says. Now, sometimes you can't help it because you write the language in your policy and you can do your best to try to reflect reality, and you are sort of forced into choosing options in the nutritional label type thing. And so, it's not going to match. But frankly, sometimes you aren't even aware that your developers are in their choices that they're making as they submit their apps or as they provide the information in the apps that Apple or Google are going to use. So anyway, you got to talk to those people, and you need to understand how that works. So many years ago at AOL, we were challenged with the problems of spam, and it was all or nothing. There were not spam folders. There were inboxes. And the more we tried to block spam, the more we sometimes made mistakes. And the danger of getting too good at blocking spam, which might help most people and might help, block more bad messages, was that there's some increased risk that you would block a critical message that somebody really wanted. And so what the product teams proposed was creating a spam folder. And marketers really freaked out for fear that their messages would be pushed into that spam folder and that nobody would ever look at their spam folder. But the spam blocking teams made it very clear that they would be able to more effectively, block something that they were 98% sure was spam, but not 100% sure. And well, they'll put it in the spam folder. And then if people could be trained to occasionally check their spam folder, then you would not miss that critical message. And then, of course, you could train it. And by the way, just to make sure that the messages you really wanted is anybody who was in your inbox or anybody who had even replied to where they were automatically put into your contacts, would capture most people's communications and avoid those problems. But there was a lot of debate and stress. And now, obviously, we all expect that there is a spam folder. And yes, sometimes we miss messages and go check your spam folder, or, hey, add the companies that you do business with to your contacts so that they can avoid the spam folder. It's not perfect, but it has allowed spam blocking to become much more effective, because if they occasionally make mistakes, it's not a big deal. When Google started rolling out the different tabs, which are they're right there. I mean, yes, you have to, click to choose them. Again, marketers were super worried, but for most people, it's become a useful way to filter their box, because we all get so many messages, and it's useful to have one folder that really is, the people and then something that is newsletters and updates and so forth. And yes, you sometimes don't always see all of those, but the reality is there should be different tiers. And people in general, it takes a long time to change consumer behavior. But clearly, we can't deal with a world where everything is in your primary box and you have to sift through, a majority of, unwanted messages for the critical one that you want, or even, wanted or ambivalent, but, it drowns things out. And so having that sort of filtering is critical, with only the real bad stuff, truly blocked and put in spam, and then other tiers of messages there are available, but not crowding out, your communication with your mother, your friend, your cousin, or the doctor's office. Okay. So what is Apple doing? So first of all, why is this in the news? Well, it's an interesting new feature, but the political world, who have become the most aggressive spammers in the universe because they are exempted from many of the text messaging spam laws, and have become enormously aggressive, and sometimes don't have the normal boundaries that a business that is too aggressive is, which is, I don't like them, I'm going to block them, I'm not going to deal with them. If you're running a campaign, and, again, there's multiple candidates in a race, you don't win, you're done, right? You are done. There is no downside to being, too aggressive, because if you are not, and you don't raise the money or get the vote out, you're done. So other than the big, presidential campaigns, or maybe, a long-time senator, most campaigns are startup operations. They go from zero to something. They scale up quickly. They buy a lot of data. They rely on third-party vendors, and don't have privacy and legal and security teams. It is a huge, messy risk. I say this with love. I ran for office for the first time many years ago against a machine candidate who had more resources than me. I sent out direct mail, and I could not send it out to everybody who lived in the district. I didn't have the money to do so. Of course, we only sent it to registered voters. But even then, it was a Democratic primary, so it was only going to go, no, it was a general. But even then, it was an off-cycle election. So there are people who only vote in presidential elections. They just don't pay attention. Why am I sending them mail? Again, in an ideal world, I'd love to, but I didn't have the resources. So I mailed a triple prime voter list 3 times instead of spreading my limited budget over the 128,000 residents and maybe the 40,000 or so, whatever it was, registered voters. We emailed a list of 10 or 15,000, if I recall, multiple times, and this was successful. So I deeply appreciate the fact that reaching out, getting information. I didn't have money for ads or TV. There's huge value in allowing the political establishment to communicate using cheap, effective tools. Otherwise, only the richest who can buy a TV ad or who can, buy the homepage, on a major website are going to be able to reach an audience. There are people who disagree. I get it. I often debate. Professor Dan Solov, who I have huge respect for, and Dan says spam is spam is spam. People, shouldn't get barraged, shouldn't be intruded on, and he has a point. My calculation is that if we want democracy, we need to tolerate a bit of a special place for people running for office to get their message to us, even though that can be annoying, right? They knock on our door. That can be annoying, but you know what? That's how you meet the people who want to represent you. Don't answer if you're not interested. That's the kind of intrusion I think we need if we want a healthy democracy. They might call you. Yes, that's annoying, but we need to tolerate that. So I'm coming to this issue with a little bit, perhaps more openness as someone involved in the political process. But the reason this started getting a lot of noise is because some of the political groups started, when they saw what Apple was going to be doing in the iOS 26 update, yelling that this was going to block their messages and it would prevent billions of dollars, $500 million, they claimed, from being raised, and everyone had to fight it, and they really started putting up an alarm. Okay, so let's understand a bit more about what Apple is doing. And please correct me. Again, I'm using my iPad, and I don't use the messages feature because these things fight with each other when you're also texting and using the texting on your Android. So although I've got my iPad right here, my texting is happening on my Android, but I'm following both closely. So Apple already has an option where you can use filtering so that unknown senders are not in your main view. But this has been off by default, and Apple requires people to enable filtering from unknown senders. So that's not changing, right? This is for people who have enabled filtering. iOS 26 does change a few things. This unknown sender box, which was really buried at the bottom of a hierarchy of options, it's moving up to a much more visible, or at least higher at the tier location. So messages from unknown senders, when that is enabled, can be accessed from a sort of a filter button at the top right corner of the main list of messages. The previous versions of iOS required navigating away from the main list, right? So you see how Apple is starting to train people to understand that there are multiple boxes. So you'll have messages, you'll have unknown senders, and then it indicates that there's messages in there, right? Because it might be your doctor's office or another unknown sender. Then there's the spam folder, and recently deleted, unread, and you can manage the filtering, right? And so you will have the option of enabling or disabling this screening for both unknown senders and for spam. So it will mean that the texts from unknown senders no longer appear in your main conversation view, but you still get a visual prompt on the filter button when there is a screen text that you may want to check. So just like in the old days where the spam folder was created and people had to be trained, yeah, you got to check it occasionally. But there's still a lot of bias about being put in there. So there's still a lot of unsolicited stuff that gets into your main box. Gmail now, multiple tiers. So my main box is pretty clean. And I do need to check the notifications and updates and so forth, because there are subscriptions, there's newsletters, there's stuff that I get there, notices about bills and so forth. And I've learned that I do need to check those folders, and I rarely check the spam one, and it's usually a lot of spam. Okay, so what will happen to the political world? Now, dear political people, I have a lot of tolerance that somebody sends me an unsolicited message and I opt out, and then hopefully I don't hear from them again. As somebody who has donated over the years to candidates or signed up, sometimes I may not even like a candidate, but I want to know what they're up to. It's the other side, for instance. I want to see their communications. So I'm on a lot of those lists. But as a result, those of us who are active and engaged have our phone numbers and emails sold an unbelievable number of times. Unbelievable number of times. And you can opt out all day and all night, and there are more candidates. Now, again, I live in the district. I'm going to tolerate it. Spam me away to let me know you're alive and tell me why I ought to vote for you. You're in my state. You have some relevance to me. But candidates around the country can buy lists of people who ever donated to a Democrat, ever donated to a Republican, are pro-gun or pro-choice or pro-whatever. And you can opt out of that central database, these databases provided by the political parties themselves. If so, let me know, because I'd like to get out of that. So I spend an enormous amount of time. But again, when it was email, okay, whatever. We've gotten used to having the boxes that filter a little bit more effectively. But your text messages, right? My email does not bing. I get so many emails, right? I don't get a, who gets a tone? Does anybody here get a tone when you get a new email, right? There was a time many, many years ago, if you've been around as long as I, that you did. You got an alert. You got an email. Go check your email, right? You've got mail, okay? But our text messages, we often do have it go bing, bing, right? Because it's urgent. It's a friend. It's something that you want to be alerted about. Many of us do have a notification when we get a text message, and it's completely destroyed when every political candidate in the world can slam you. So first of all, please, let's get some sort of global opt-out. And I promise I will sign up for the ones that I want, but brokering that so broadly has really broken and burnt out and made people, I think, very concerned about providing that sort of information or wanting to report those things as spam, right? Which again tells the deliverers people are complaining, right? I mean, this is the reason Apple's doing this. It's not because they want to ding political messages, but because the level of unsolicited texting, which people didn't want to do in the past, like that was considered too aggressive, right? Well, maybe I'll send a lot of emails, whatever, people can ignore them. But texting, that was sort of an intrusion. And it seems like all the barriers are off. Unsolicited marketing messages like that, we see far fewer of because, frankly, businesses are aware that it burns the relationship and you're at risk of violating the TCPA, which is aggressively enforced by regulators and aggressively litigated because there are private rights of action and people have paid huge judgments. And so you don't get a lot of unsolicited marketing messages, frankly. The opt-in process is usually pretty clear. You've got to confirm that you want to be on the list. If you are a marketer and you aggressively send out text messages, you're going to get hit with legal action. So the political world has since they are exempted from these laws, has a clear shot at your inbox, and it has been abused. And again, I'm saying that as somebody eager to see more people getting more information, more good information from potential candidates. So I'm glad that Apple is making this move. Marketers, it's actually, or political marketers, it's not going to hurt you. People are beginning to go down this path now. Apple is beginning to steer them down this path that your messages are going to have multiple tiers. And there are your family members who should be texting you and really getting in your box. And then there's the messages you need from your doctor's office, from others, the notifications that, confirm two-factor, all those sorts of things. You need those, but they are more business-oriented messages. And then there are unknown senders who, again, if I want to hear from you, I can add you afterwards to to my inbox. And people are beginning to go down that path. And so I think Apple's doing it in a nuanced way. It is not default on for everybody. So this is the beginning of a process. And I think the right balance. So kudos, Apple. I'm glad. I think a lot of the initial noise was confusion over how this was going to work. And I think Apple is seeking to drive a reasonable process that will give most of us more control, but frankly, it's not blocking these things as spam, right? It gives them more leeway to not block them as spam. Today, when I look at my spam email folder, you know what's in there? Tons of campaign messages, because they are triggering so many negative reactions that it's triggering the filters to block this kind of stuff, right? We don't want these blocked as spam. People aren't regularly checking their spam folder. This creates a pleasant intermediary place where people will be looking, because there are going to be messages there that people do need. They'll be political, but they'll also be from some of the businesses that you want to be interacting with, and it'll be a secondary appropriate place, but something that takes it out of the most personal communication, right? Where you do need and look at what's happening on WhatsApp and these other tools, right? Where we all have these family groups, right? And our families now, instead of group texting, will end up sending messages to the family group, right? And I check the family group. Unfortunately, some of my family members are a little too spammy and are sending lots of political messages in there that I don't want to see, but that's on me. And so this is the natural behavior. People have started filtering their messaging into groups, their friend group that they do these things with, their family group, their old buddies from here and there. I look at my phone right now and I have my wine guys group, my family groups, my extended family group, the Polonetsky side, the side that includes my wife's family. I have 3 brothers. There's a Polonetsky brothers group, and that is the beginning of the trend. So political people, marketers, get used to it. At the end of the day, it is the job of these device makers to provide devices that work for users, not to be sort of an open receptacle for marketing. Anyway, delighted to. Oh, the other thing is, and I encourage many of you to do this over the next couple of weeks. If you have a little more downtime, I'll be taking some materials on vacation with me. Even model context protocol, right? This is the language, the standard that Anthropic set forward. OpenAI, Google, others have adopted it, and it's the way the language models interact with your company, with your servers, and privacy, security, other issues that will determine that interaction are intermediated in some manner through that. So I'm looking to learn more. I'm going to be talking a bit about this at the Global Privacy Assembly on the Agentic AI panel that I'm on with a couple of regulators, and I'm trying to get smarter about it. So if you have any good recommended resources, I'm pulling and printing and downloading some things for my airplane travel, but hopefully many of you are already somewhat familiar. But if you're not, model context protocol, make sure you understand, just like you need to understand how Apple and Google handle the rules for developers around apps so that you can understand the flow. These are the decisions that your product and business people are making as they build and interact with AI. You need to understand it as well if you're going to keep up with them. Happy Friday. Thanks for those who tuned in, and see you later in August.